This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open-source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Hey, folks. Welcome to the show today. I'm Rob McNealy, and today we are talking to Mark Walters of Armed America Radio. He is like a paladin of gun rights. He is out there every day on social media protecting your right and my right to defend ourselves in the United States. And in my opinion, he's out there protecting our ability to fight off what I think is probably a communist insurgency attacking the United States right now. Mark, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thanks for having me on, bro. I appreciate it.
I can't say how much of it is an honor to have you on today. Honestly, we've met a few times in person, gun rights, SHOT Show. But I mean, I've been following your show a lot, as much as I can tune in during the day. And you are doing some amazing stuff out there.
Well,
and I'm not just trying to like kiss your butt or anything like that, though. Take it for what it is.
I appreciate it very much.
But things are out there are kind of scary right now. I talk to a lot of gun owners out there, and right now people are scared. I think it's the number one thing I'm seeing.
They should be. I mean, look at what we're facing in this country today. I've never seen anything like this before in my life, ever. And I don't think if the wrong thing happens in just a few days from now, I don't know what it's going to look like. I know the country won't look the same for my kids and your kids as it did for me growing up and for you growing up. I can tell you that much. And I'm doing everything in my power to see to it that doesn't happen. But the Second Amendment, where, because I view everything on my programs, as you know, Rob, through the lens of the Second Amendment. And I can tie just about everything back to that. We've been doing it for a decade and almost 12 years now. And we've been right every step of the way. And we're watching it happen right now today, right before our eyes. So it's very scary right now. Communist insurgency. I'm going to tell you right now that there's a very well-funded effort to take down this country. And we're watching it on display. And former Democrats, they're now socialist, Marxist, communists masquerading as former Democrats. We're seeing it happen every day in every Democrat-controlled city in the country, virtually. It's frightening.
It's truly amazing what's happening, and I tend to be more libertarian, and I always have been, but it's frightening for me as someone looking at, the ability for people to defend themselves, right, when you literally have governments standing down. Like I'm originally from the Detroit area, and I grew up in the 80s, back when Detroit was like the murder and crack capital of the country and things like that. And it's interesting because I know a lot about like how things had changed in Detroit. So back in the 60s, they had these like, more legitimate civil rights riots where people legitimately were, fighting for real rights. And those riots only took a couple days and they were completely quelled by the government, and peace and order was restored. It did lead to a conversation. It did lead to some changes, but it also led to white flight. It also led to people leaving certain inner cities and hollowed out those different locations and urban centers. It's interesting right now. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and you would not believe the number of California plates floating around I-80 and I-215 right now in my neighborhood. It's insane. They're evacuating what it looks like is these liberal strongholds because they see what they're turning into, these giant shit shows. And I'm concerned with what concerns me the most, Mark, is how these cities are standing down and are absolutely rooting for destruction of their own cities. And I can't fathom it. It makes zero sense to me. It's like suicide for our country.
But we don't understand. I mean, you've got to understand. First of all, I was just in Heber City, Utah. I spent 2 weeks there over the last on two separate 1 week trips out there. So I know the area. I've been out to Salt Lake a lot just recently in the last month and a half. And I would believe it because I saw the California plates myself on the highways. And I know what's occurring out there. I know a lot of people who live, work, and play and do business out there. We're seeing the same thing in Arizona. We're seeing the same thing in Montana, Idaho. From on this coast over here, we're seeing a lot of the New York flight from New York State, New Jersey, going down into Florida, coming down into Georgia, invading the South. But we've seen a lot of that for years. What we're not seeing and what we're not talking about is it's not all liberals that are getting out of there. You got a lot of conservatives with a lot of money in those states. They've had enough. And but we do know that dynamic that gets into play where they come out of where they're at and they come down to South Florida, for example, and they vote their same bullshit in that they fled up in New York. And it's a pretty contentious fight down in Florida, where I was from before I came to Georgia. And that is, we don't want your politics down here. You want to come down here from New York, come on down here from New York, but leave your New York crap up there. We don't want it here in Florida. You remember why you left is really, we say the same thing down here. You're welcome to come down here. We don't mind having your money down here, but remember why you left. But the communist aspect of this, when you talk about, almost rooting for the destruction of their own cities, they are, because they can blame somebody else for it. Look, you look at what's happening in Chicago right now. You look what's happening, particularly Portland, Oregon. I was out in Seattle when the Breonna Taylor quote unquote decision came down. We were flying private. We're not sure if we were going to be able to get through Seattle the next day to get back to the airport, to get back to Utah. We didn't know what we were going to face. But we saw SWAT car after SWAT car after SWAT van after SWAT van fly by us. We stopped no more than 4 times from the moment we got off the aircraft until we got to the Second Amendment Foundation offices in Bellevue. We pulled over 4 to 5 times, minimum, for SWAT vehicles moving all over the place. So it's happening. I've seen it with my own eyes. We see it on the news. We see it on certain news programs. We don't see it on all the news programs because they don't want to cover it. But I'm going to ask you the same question. I'll ask your viewers the same question I've been asking mine for years. And that is twofold. First is a statement. But if you show me an American city in decay, I'll show you an American city that's been run by Democrats at every level for sometimes over 100 years with no Republican in charge. It's just more of the same BS day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. And it's finally coming to light because Trump is using the bully pulpit to highlight that because of the summer of riots, not protests, riots in these Democrat-controlled cities, number one. And number two, you have to ask yourself this question: what is it about their agenda that requires you to be disarmed? And if you think about that and you go back and study some human history, you'll come up with the answer yourself. I don't have to tell it to you.
Yeah. And people don't like to think about that.
Well,
and I think I absolutely agree. But I mean, it's like there's such a disconnect, a cognitive disconnect between government policies and quality of life and standard of living. Like, I have a lot of friends in California, all up and down the coast, even in Orange County. And I go to California quite frequently for business as well. Some of my best clients are in California. I love California. I love the whole West Coast. I love the Pacific Northwest. If it wasn't crazy full of communists, I'd probably be living in Oregon.
It's a beautiful place, man. Anybody who's ever seen that Columbia River Basin or been into Port, those are beautiful areas of the country. It's God's country out there. Politically, I mean, I was asked to go up to the Second Amendment, to go up to work at the Second Amendment Foundation offices with Alan a number of years ago, 3 years ago. We talked about it. Seattle, rainy. I could get past it. The other 6 months of the year, gorgeous up there, but there's a lot to do. It's beautiful, but politically speaking, I couldn't do it. I couldn't live in the area. I'm very content in my red area and don't want to get out of it.
So I'm 48. I'm not a kid. So I grew up in the 80s, and I've seen a lot of things happen over the years and politically. And it's funny because up until like 6-8 months ago, and I grew up in a very contentious, very segregated urban area, and race relations had never been better in my life up until about 6 months ago in this country. Like, because I saw growing up, things were very contentious when I was a kid, and they got better and they got better. And I owned a business in the inner city of Denver where I lived for 12 years. And things were getting better for everybody. People were getting along. And it's interesting, the rhetoric, which is scary to me. And I live in Salt Lake now. I'm a transplant. I love Utah though. And we're seeing right now, like, even in Provo, Utah, where these communists are flash mobbing cars and shooting drivers who don't want to be flash mobbed by a mob, right? They just want to hey, I'm just driving, I'm going to drive through because you guys are dangerous. And, Mark, one of the things that I like to do is I like to read history books, and I do read a lot about Soviet history. It's just one of my, fascinations, because I like to know where we came from. And what I'm seeing, not only in tactics as rhetoric, is absolutely communist propaganda. It's the rule book.
Sure,
and what I'm concerned about, and it'll be interesting to see how the election turns out in a week and a half, but one of the things that I see is that, and I'm concerned about this, is that if you look at what they did, and they did this in Germany too with the brown shirts, right? It started off with protesting, legitimate, we're just pissed off. And then it moved to like rioting, but then it led to sabotage. And then it led to murder and a lot more things of that nature. And my concern is, one, riots don't get what you want. Okay. Riots are not something that if you want to change someone's hearts and minds, it does that opposite effect. I mean, I think you and I agree on that.
Yeah, Biden's going to find that out too, come a few days from now.
If Biden wins, I think BLM goes away. I think they're gonna drop them as fast as possible, because they're now going to be an annoyance. And you saw this both in the Soviet Union, and after the Bolshevik Revolution, and you saw this with the brown shirts in Germany. After those,
that's what Karl Marx called the useful idiots.
The useful
idiots is what he referred to as. And what happens is those people believe that if they help the power brokers rise to power, that they're going to somehow benefit, and they're not. They get discarded by the power brokers, and the power brokers insert their own. It's history. You can read it. Don't take my word for it. We don't have enough time to get into it right now. But the term useful idiots is exactly correct. And we're watching the Democrat Party do the same thing right now. And if you don't believe me, watch how they give themselves plausible deniability. Okay, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, the rest of them, they won't talk about what's happening in the city streets because they're run by Democrats. They don't have to, but they like the benefit of benefiting from what's happening in the streets from within their own circles and their own base politically. And then they can walk away from it and say, hey, I didn't endorse any of that. But, Trump did an outstanding job. Even in the first debate, when he was all over the place, he made it very clear when he was talking about the rioting, when he said, you have no law enforcement support, none whatsoever. And Biden can't support to anything but that. But he's going to find out. The Kenosha rioters, those are Biden, all of the rioters are all Biden supporters. Those are not Donald Trump voters. And I think you're going to see that manifest itself in the election in some of these cities. I think there's a big shock coming because of that. But anyway, I digress. I could go
I digress all you want. But I think you made a good point, though. And I've known enough about politics and the work that I've done over the years is that typically the people that are going to be the rioters aren't voters in general. They just don't vote. They don't show up usually. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand. Just because there's masses in the streets, there is a profile for people that show up to the polls and vote.
Right.
And the people that they're seeing in the street rioting are not those people. And so if they mistake the people in the streets as voting base, I think that's a miscalculation.
It could be, although I guess what we're saying here is that is a leftist base. That is a supporter of communism. It's a supporter of Marxism. It is a far left fascist base, unlike the right that we see where, and again, this is a conversation we could have a lot of fun with. I read just a report yesterday of, I forget where I saw it, on where the right-wing militias were going to be a threat in the top 4 states. Georgia was one, Florida was one, Michigan was one, and I believe Wisconsin was the other of the 4 where they're threatening. And I live in Georgia, and I see none of what they're talking about. So I have absolutely no clue, who put this out. I have no idea why they did what they did or why they said what they said, when in reality, what we're seeing is left-wing mobs in Democrat-controlled cities all summer long. So I guess, again, it's a campaign from the propaganda machine working on the left to try to move the needle or try to sway people's opinions, just like they do with fake oversampled polls like we saw in 2016 that we're seeing right now today. But, just keep your fingers crossed that the right thing happens.
One of my, I'm not gonna say who it is, but one of my friends does political polling. He runs a company that does that. And he said that they had a poll in Florida last week of independents, just a couple days ago. And I just had a phone call with him 2 days ago. And he said they polled 122,000 people, had 10,000 people respond. And he said, based on those independents, Trump was a landslide in Florida. And he said that there was a poll that came out before that only sampled 600. And that was, favoring Biden. So it's, and I've heard this from several people now that the polls are not reflecting what people are saying. But I think the numbers that are important to me are like, how many first-time gun owners are there this year so far?
Oh, millions. There are millions, over 5 million. The estimation is anywhere from 5 to 10 million. Let me give you a dynamic in play in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is fun to watch. In 2016, first of all, Pennsylvania has 67 counties. In 2016, Trump won 57 of those 67 counties. The 10 counties that went blue predominantly surrounded Philadelphia, one up by Scranton, State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State University is. Go figure that. And then Allegheny County out in the west in Pittsburgh. Erie, Pennsylvania, top left northwestern quadrant of the state, went red for the first time since Reagan. Of those 57 counties that Trump won, 44,279 That was the vote spread in the state. There was a 44,279 vote spread in Trump's favor. Of that 44,000, 22,000, 50% of that came from Erie, which flipped since Reagan. There's no indication that Erie is going to flip back to Biden, number one. And number two, you drop down to Allegheny County. There's two things that another was just added into play by Wolf just the other day, just 2 or 3 days ago. Wolf vetoed a bill, a bipartisan bill that passed in Pennsylvania, both houses. Believe it or not, he vetoed the bill that would have opened up restaurants. You know, he's keeping these lockdowns in place. These people are stepping all over the throats of their citizens, and he vetoed that. So that's going to come into the mix as well. But when you take into consideration, Pennsylvania is a very gun-friendly state, believe it or not. And when you look at the numbers of new gun owners and new permit holders, Sheriff Mullins in Allegheny County was between 6,000 and 10,000 signatures behind in concealed carry permit applications in Allegheny County, which went blue in 2016. So you've got to look at those numbers because that was not a dynamic in play in 2016. But it is today. Could Allegheny flip red? Those gun owners, are those gun owners going to vote their guns away with Biden? We don't know. What we do know is that is evidence that more people, millions of people, if you blow that up around the country, are purchasing guns and are concerned about what they're seeing. And there's only one way you can logically break that, and that's for a Trump. That's got to be a Trump victory, because it's certainly not when you look at the party of gun control, which is the communist Marxist socialist currently masquerading as former Democrat.
I have a lot of, my wife's a doctor. I have an MBA. We tend to run around circles that have educated people that are left and right. And I have good friends that are liberals, but they're not like communists. And there is a difference. Right. They're more of that blue dog of, the 70s liberal is a very different thing than a liberal is today politically. One's a communist, one just wants, certain people not to be persecuted, right. and that's their view. And my friends, they're very successful. They make money. And I've had so many of those friends. I seem to be the go-to gun guy in my circle. They're like, "Hey, Rob, what's a good pistol I should get?"
Sure. I know people are getting the same questions from liberal communists as well.
Where can I get 9mm ammo from? That's not $1 round.
The one communist in my family has been all over me about a particular Beretta, which he finally made a purchase of. Didn't want his wife to know. And he and I got into, it's a cousin of mine, and he and I were very close growing up. And we got into a very heated exchange for the first time in many years, a couple nights ago, actually on Monday night, or Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday night. And I made him realize just how much money he wasted on his PhD. It was so easy to bury him. It wasn't even funny. I mean, I literally shut him right up. He could not respond to facts. He could not reply to facts. For example, Chicago, controlled by Democrats for about 100 years. They own the mayhem in Chicago, period. He was trying to tell me that under the Democrats, the murder rate was dropping in Chicago, and it was laughable what kind of path he was going down, considering that there was a handgun ban from 1982 in Chicago from 1982 to 2008 or till 2010. And when he looked at those numbers, these are things that he didn't even think about. And he did not know that Chicago had been run. He didn't even think about it. Didn't even consider the fact that Chicago had been run by Democrats for the last 100 years. They literally own the mayhem. So at what point in time do you put your PhD to work and figure, okay, hey, maybe, just maybe, 101 years might be, at what point do we draw that line, Rob? 100, what do we need? 101 years? You want 102 years, 103 years? Where do we draw the line? It's time to make a change. And when you point these things out to people who aren't thinking in those terms, it's emotional for them. But when you begin to point out actual statistics and numbers, the murder rates were climbing in Chicago for decades. We've been running the numbers for years. Thousands of people shot annually. Under Democrat control, at what point do you realize, hey, we need to make a change in Chicago? What we've been doing for the last century isn't working. And I believe people are seeing that now. I believe they're seeing that now that Trump has the bully pulpit this time and is mentioning some of the things that are happening. And again, I asked him the question, show me an American city in decay. I'll show you an American city run by Democrats at every level for decades. Prove me wrong. He tried to pull out Eugene, Oregon, which, by the way, is run by the way, by a Democrat. So I don't even know where that came from. Okay. But it's impossible to do. So it was a fun argument. And,
well, I'm sorry you're arguing with your cousin.
Oh no, we do that. We can do that. He and I have that relationship where we can bring it right back down and we're good to rock and roll. But that was the most heated exchange that we've had in a number of years.
So worst case scenario, let's just put it this way. I think Trump's probably going to win. but it's hard to call because I don't know how much people are going to monkey with the election results. And I don't think either side is going to accept the election results regardless. But what do you think is going to happen if Trump does win?
I think you're going to see, it's a great question. It's a frightening question. Honestly, the prediction that I've made, and I'll make it on your program as well. I've said it publicly on my show, on hundreds of radio stations. I think Trump is going to win 310 plus electoral votes. I look at Pennsylvania. I don't see Pennsylvania shifting at all. I see his vote margin. Margin widening in Pennsylvania. I look at the basics. I'm not looking, when I see a poll in Michigan that shows Biden plus 14 and 775 people talked, are you kidding me? There's nothing scientific about that at all. It's an absolute joke. And here's why. I used to live in Michigan myself. I lived in Ann Arbor.
I'm from Michigan.
I lived there from the time I was 9 until 15. A lot of firsts during those years. I know a lot of people there. First girlfriend, learned how to water ski up there. Did a lot of first things during those formative years. And I have a lot of friends in Michigan still. They hate her. Governor Whitmer is despised. There are 9 authorized recall elections or efforts going on against her right now. 9 that have been sanctioned by the state. The state Supreme Court in Michigan, I believe it was a unanimous decision, just slapped her right smack down with the state constitution and said, what you're doing is unconstitutional in this state. You are abusing your power. I cannot believe Michiganders are going to vote for more of that at the federal level with Biden after many thousands of them have lost their jobs, their restaurants, some of them their houses, their cars. They're bankrupt because this woman's been she's been standing on their necks down there or up there in Michigan for months now. I don't see that becoming Biden country. Michigan stays Trump. When you go over to Wisconsin, Kenosha rioting, I've been traveling to Wisconsin for a decade and a half, 2-3 times a year doing business up there. The vast majority of that state is rural and conservative. It's that simple. Just like anywhere else, you get outside the city, Milwaukee's blue, a little bit of Green Bay's blue, but the rest of the state is bright red. Those people are coming out to vote because they don't want what they saw happen in Kenosha happening again at the federal level. I believe Minnesota is going to flip. I believe, Ilhan Omar is probably going to win her seat back because of the Somali population in the district that she's in. But the rest of the people in the state of Minnesota, state I'm familiar with and broadcasted from for 10 straight years at the Minnesota State Fair, I don't believe the people of Minnesota want more of what they saw in Minneapolis. Rioting and destruction in their cities. That does not bode well for Joe Biden. I think Minnesota flips. Ohio stays red. And like your buddy said, Florida, where I came from after many years down here, I believe the Hispanic vote and the black vote in Florida is just going to roll for the Trump train. And like he said, 120,000, that's a legitimate sample size with 10,000 people that responded versus ABC, NBC, or CBS that say they poll 800, or even Fox, 875 people. And they get these ridiculous, and here's why. There's no 14% divide anywhere in this country.
No.
None. It's going to be 1, 2, or 3%. So, these numbers are off just by their very factor. And when you look at the oversampling that they're doing of Democrats in these things. So when you look at just those states right there, just there, I think Nevada's going to flip. I could be wrong about all of this. But in 2016, my gut feeling, which I feel right now, was right. I closed out my show on Election Day on Tuesday last year. First Tuesday after the first Monday or the last election in 2016, I said there's going to be a lot of Americans going to be waking up with a rude awakening tomorrow. Trump plus 300 electoral votes. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you on the radio. Trump won by 306 electoral votes. If that scenario plays out, what I just described to you, I think you're going to see 310 plus electoral votes for Trump. And if that's the case, it's going to be very difficult for the other side to claim some type of victory. But they won't concede. I don't think either side will, regardless. You're right. But the left is going to riot in American cities regardless of the outcome of the election. I've already seen the blueprints and the plans. I've read it. It's right. The Federalist printed it just 2 weeks ago. So it's frightening, but it's coming. Be prepared for it, regardless of where you live.
Do you think that if Trump, I would think they would, like some people said that Trump's been deliberately hands off in some of these cities, and to me, it's like, I think the federal government has the constitutional authority to go in and crush these protests in a lot of these states because they're using revolutionary rhetoric, which could easily be considered an insurgency. And that is a constitutional use of force by the federal government to go intervene to, quell insurrection. And so I'm surprised that he has been so everybody bitches about Trump. And I'm like, dude, in the Detroit riots in like 68, they were shooting people. The
Sure.
cops were just killing people. And in 2 days it was done, or a couple days it was done. Now, I'm not saying I'm advocating for that, but the government has been very hands off, both federal and local, on these riots. They've been allowed to continue.
They have been. They've been allowed to continue by local authorities. And Rob, I'll be honest with you, I think when Trump is, after a Trump victory, when he is not constrained with another election, let's go back to the old Barack Obama when he leaned into Putin and he said, hey, let's talk about this later after the election when I don't have to worry about it. Okay. You're going to see a completely different Donald Trump when it comes to rioting in the cities. Why? Because there's going to be a mandate, because he's running as the law and order president. And if he wins, he's going to claim that mandate. And you're not going to see Portland on fire anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, these are enemy combatants. I've written about it, I've talked about it, and I'll say it right here on your podcast. They need to be treated as such. You need to go in there, clean them up, send the federal government in there to do what is necessary. If they fight you back, treat them as enemy combatants. It's that simple. Wipe them out and end this insurrection in American cities and American streets so that people can go on with their lives. It has to come to a stop. Those people, if you ask them, they will tell you that they are at war with the U.S.
Yeah.
And we had better figure that out.
Now I have 4 kids, and I can tell you when they're literally shooting drivers in Provo, Utah, just driving down the street, and they're flipping cop cars 5 miles from my house here in the Salt Lake area. That's scary to think that my wife could be driving around with the kids in the car and just be mobbed by rioters. And then they can decide, well, we think you're a conservative, so we're going to shoot you if you don't want to be surrounded by rioters. And I tell you, that's scary. And I think most people that are reasonable fear that, because that's not protesting. That's not free speech. You don't have a right to block traffic. You're violating people's 9th Amendment right to travel when you stop a car that's lawfully going down a road. And at this point, I think if a mob surrounds your car, I think it's reasonable, given the history of these shootings of drivers, that if you stop and they get you out of the car, you're going to get beaten to death. And I think
I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't hesitate for one split second. I have a right to defend my family. I have a right to defend myself in my vehicle. If my vehicle is surrounded, I'm going to run you over, or I'm going to shoot you and run you over in the process, and I'll deal with the aftermath later. Simple as that, and I'll have it all on video. Look, I'm not afraid of the mob. I talk about the mob every single day. I couldn't care less, okay? We know that if we cave into the left-wing mob, you're done. I do believe that, and I've heard a number of folks talk about this. I'll give you my own personal opinion about it here. I don't get swayed either way. But I believe you're going to see conservatives. There will be people that will openly murder people after, if they're victorious, they will see what they've done as a mandate that the rest of America approved of their violence and their tactics as we've seen unfold in Seattle, as we've seen unfold in Portland, et cetera. But I think you'll see some people claim that they've been vindicated, that America wants. That's why they're doing it. We live in terrible times in America. I would tell your viewers and your listeners, you should be prepared anyway. Okay. Have enough food, have enough water, have enough ammunition. You should be doing that anyway. Even Obama's FEMA department told you that. I came from Florida where, that was just a basic hurricane kit. I've got enough food, enough ammo. You should have these things anyway. But it's a good idea to remind people now that there are very bad people out there who will do bad things. As you've said about, car flipping in Provo, Utah, and everywhere else. Be prepared. Don't walk through life with blinders on. Make sure you're situationally aware. Be prepared to defend yourself if you have to, because let me tell you something. I'd be more than happy to go up in front of a jury if my family's alive and I made it home because I had to run 2 idiots over that were trying to block my vehicle, or if I had to shoot somebody that was trying to get into my car by smashing the window with a skateboard. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to defend my actions as self-defense in that case. Okay? I'll defend my family, and I'll defend my life, and I'll defend my community with whatever means necessary. And I'll leave it at that. I think that's a responsibility that all Americans have.
I agree. Mark, I know we're running out of time here. Where can people find out more about you and your radio show?
ArmedAmericanRadio.org, ArmedAmericanRadio.org, or you can visit me on that hateful, vile, despicable, disgusting place known as Twitter at AARMark. And if you don't have to have Twitter, don't visit me, because I would advise you to get off of that crap and not use it. But if you do have it, make sure to follow me at AARMark. It's that simple. But that social media, by the way, that combined with a 24/7 in the tank propaganda news media is doing terrible destruction to this country. I don't know how we ever put that genie back in the bottle. It's already out. It's fomenting hatred in this country that I don't think we'll ever be able to get back. I truly don't know what we're going to be able to do to fix this country.
Well, thank you, brother, and keep up the good work. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Count on it, Rob. Thanks much, man. Looking forward to seeing you again in a post-COVID environment, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.